Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, we're tackling some of the most common criticisms that we see online about in-moment feedback, especially smiley button style devices. So we pulled some reoccurring themes from Reddit and other forums, things like it's just lip service, management ignores it, staff get punished for bad scores, or even the data can't be trusted. So we're going to address these directly and share what actually makes real-time feedback useful in the real world. So you're welcome to leave comments as we go, and we'll be checking the thread after the event. And then just a quick note, this session is being recorded, so you can rewatch it later or share it with your team. I'm Jamie Lundy. I'm the Customer Training and Enablement Manager here at HappyOrNot. And joining me are my colleagues, Ethan Trainer and Sam Kirkpatrick. So let's do some quick intros. Ethan, quick intro. Who are you? And what's one myth that you hear most often when people first see real-time feedback?
Hey everybody, my name is Ethan. I'm one of the sales directors here at HappyOrNot. I've been here about 7.5 years and probably spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of customers at this point and really worked with them to solve their unique challenges. So the common myth that I hear a lot is that you're only going to get negative feedback, which is really not true at all. You get the positive, the negative, and everything in between. So we'll cover that a little bit more later in the call.
Excellent. Thank you, Ethan. Sam, same for you. Who are you and what's one concern that you hear most often after customers go live?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. My name's Sam Kirkpatrick. I work on the customer success team here. So generally helping customers anywhere from 10 devices up to 1,000 plus devices, and just getting the most out of those services, and getting your organization up to speed and figuring out what's next in your journey for customer feedback. I think one concern that I hear from customers most often is maybe how do we keep this program fresh? How do we keep the participation levels maintained? Generally over those first, kind of that implementation period of up to 60 days, we're getting tons of feedback and it's very exciting. And, we just want to make sure how are we able to keep that moving forward? So we'll cover that again, as Ethan said, throughout this conversation, but looking forward to tackling some of these myths.
Excellent. Looking forward to getting into some of this today. Let's start with the myth or truth that smiley feedback is just lip service. So it makes it look like you're listening, but nothing changes. So when does feedback become lip service and what makes it real?
So, I think one of the common issues is people, they don't really develop a program around the feedback. It's just simply, let's put it out there and, let's just hope that it waves a magic wand and solves all our issues, which is obviously not the case. You have to really develop a system around the feedback collection fabric and be able to really enact actions based on what the feedback's telling you. Otherwise, it's really just, not going to do anything.
Yeah, I think, kind of what makes the program actionable or, a real program, so to speak, is you are able to get that feedback within that same day. Generally, folks are able to see it within a couple minutes on our dashboard. So not saying that everybody is, focused on staring at the app all day, but for the folks that do need that same day visibility, it is something that's there. We do recommend at least checking some of the comments on a fairly regular basis. Also think making sure that there's a clear owner per each one of your stores or locations, making sure that there's just clear ownership in the process. That does go up too. So, you've got that store manager who has employees under them, and then you've got folks that those managers would then report into, and everybody kind of has a different level of needs for their reporting, and just making sure that everybody understands not only what those needs are, but how are we going to report on it? What's that cadence look like? Are we doing this on our monthly director call? Things along those lines. And for clarity, that is absolutely what we recommend, is that people are definitely socializing these internally. I think on a store manager level, making sure that you're seeing what folks are saying about your just operations in general. Is it employees? Is it product selection? What's going on with just across your environment as a whole? And then I think the other piece to kind of close the loop maybe is you'll probably hear this a lot throughout this presentation or this talk, but um, the you said we did loop. So we have recommended this with pretty much every customer that I've ever worked with is getting that socialized. So making sure that people are able to see not only the score that's coming in for a specific area, but what are those actual comments that people are leaving? Is it too hot? Is your favorite vending machine item gone? Is your favorite product that was on the shelf no longer there? So actually seeing what people have said, distilling that down into a few actions you've taken, and it doesn't have to be anything, super involved. It could be you take 3 comments on a monthly basis, and here's the action that we were actually able to take. So I think that clearly defines to the feedback giver, I'm going to take my time to leave feedback, and here's what is actually being done about that.
Yeah, I mean, if feedback doesn't move operations, it's really just charade or theater, right? It doesn't have any impact. So
Exactly. Excellent. And we do have templates for that feedback loop. You'd said we did posters. We have everything available for our customers to use. So it makes it very easy for them to go ahead and just take those comments, pop them in there, and then share that with customers and employees both, because seeing those is an important part of that feedback loop. All right. I think we can go ahead and move on to our next myth, which is, can you trust the data? So critics say, kids spam it, people press randomly, or staff just hit the green button. So how do we protect that quality of data and still get a reliable signal?
Yeah, I'm sure, Ethan, you've heard this throughout many of your sales cycles, and I think I've heard this from the majority of customers. Once we get going, the program starts to be socialized internally, and folks start to realize or start to wonder, is this going to affect my performance and my performance eval? Are they going to start pulling up HappyOrNot numbers and scores and all that stuff? So, yeah, I mean, I guess just to start, it is the half of the design, right, is to make the feedback frictionless, to make it obvious of what we want. So these smiley faces that either will dance around on our touch devices or maybe just sit there on the terminal devices, they are supposed to be eye-catching and frictionless, and so people are going to want to engage with them, and that includes kids. You are going to get feedback from that 5-year-old standing with their parents in line. I think and again, we just have to be honest about that, and that is part of the program. But where that starts to turn into, maybe just noise in the background that isn't actually going to change the signal, perhaps, is the amount of participation. So I'd mentioned this is a frictionless design, and that is the whole concept. So high participation is the name of the game. We do want folks in a heavy atmosphere or heavy environment rather, to where there are a lot of footfall. You're able to just go up to the device, indicate your feedback, and keep moving on. So I would say that's number one. Number two, there are some technology fallbacks, I suppose, that we have within the devices. So again, we have a few different types of devices, but there's ways that we can detect a number of feedback within a given time period, and we'll only maybe count one of those. Or maybe we detect that the same person is coming up to the device a bunch of times within a period of time. We can start to exclude some of those feedbacks. And then there is, within the touch device, there is the ability to have a demographics filter. So we can actually see the age, or the perceived age at least, based on a facial vector of the feedback giver. So I think those are maybe the first 2 steps of making sure that our feedback is actually, or that there is going to be noise in there, but that we can actually trust the data. Ethan, I'll maybe turn it over to you to.
Yeah, no, those are really good points. And the whole idea is to look at it holistically, right? You're not reacting to just one-off comments, because like you said, occasionally some people will write stuff that's not valuable, but the idea is to look at the long-term patterns that develop, so that way you're able to get a good overall indicator of what's going on there.
And I think maybe the last thing I would add is just from the open feedback perspective. So again, this is with some of our devices have this, some of them do not. But if you are using a device that allows open feedback, we do have categorizations that can be tagged to it. So even from just getting rid of the noise, we do have ways to get rid of spam comments. We also have some ways that we're using technology internally to maybe there's a profane comment that's left and we don't necessarily want to expose that to our managers. So we're able to change that word while keeping the same sentiment of the feedback and really allowing all of that feedback to come through, even if it is, a bit emotional, maybe we'll say, but all feedback is at least valid to be looked through. There is going to be some of that noise we've talked about, but I think just again, the volume is what is going to be most shocking to people. Ethan had mentioned his biggest myth is folks thinking that the feedback will all be negative, and I think that's something we see with traditional feedback. But here, I would say maybe the second thing, and that is probably the most common thing I hear as well, maybe Ethan, but maybe the second thing is how much feedback. We tell people during the cycles, how much we would expect, and when it hits that and exceeds, especially coming from some of these other traditional surveying tools, I think that's really just such a surprise and delight, honestly, for the customers that we're working with.
Yeah, when you lower the barrier to leave feedback, you're going to get such a wider spectrum than a traditional channel. An email survey, you're only getting the very unhappy people, typically phone number, again, same thing. But yeah, with something as frictionless, like you said, as just tapping a screen or tapping a button, or doing a digital smiley, it's really, like you said, like we talked about, just getting the entire spectrum.
Okay, so just to sum up the question of can we trust the data? Yes, we have built-in misuse filtering. We have that feedback guard, which is a collection safeguard designed specifically to maintain the high quality of customer feedback. And also we have the trend-based insights. So we have you covered with that. Next, I'd like to talk about the tools punishing frontline's teams. Have you guys heard people say this? They feel like, how to use the feedback without creating fear or blame, or even people gaming the system.
Yeah, I think this is totally natural for somebody when you have a device that, again, some of these are tied to bonus programs and other compensation means. So I think it is, whenever there is a device that could be this, quote, big brother kind of device in the background, I think everybody is going to at least consider that could happen. So that's fair. I think that's where it's on. I spoke a little bit about that directorship and whoever else, think about your own organization and kind of all of the different personas that live within that. And it's kind of within those leaders to make sure that they're exposing the organization to the program. What is the point of us putting this program into place? Do we want to just collect, operational sentiment of what our customers might be feeling on a given day? Are we trying to see which employees are being called out specifically? And then during the open feedback, we can see, Jamie's called out in all of her training sessions. Jamie must be, a great onboarding specialist or something along those lines. So again, I think it's really on leadership to make sure that everybody understands the why of the program. I think it's also to make sure that this is really just an improvement tool. We're tracking, if you think about from an operations perspective, there's probably, a handful of tools at least that every organization may or may not be using. HappyOrNot is one of those. And just making sure that, we're really just using this as a tool to diagnose the operational issue, not necessarily the colleague or coworker issue. I think that's, probably another thing that we would put into the whole very common myths, and I suppose that is why we're talking about this today. But I do think people would assume that most of the feedback left about a person would be negative. So I think, all of us, again, if we sort of assume all feedback would be negative, then we would see, well, Jamie is going to be mentioned in a negative sentiment. And, honestly, if I'm thinking back on all of the customers I've worked with, I think I'm sure I've seen a few names that are called out in negative comments, but the vast majority of it is positive feedback. And I think just making sure that you're able to recognize those people, even if it's, is it a cashier who is always going above and beyond? Is it the person at the front desk who's always going above and beyond? Is it a lunch worker at a school who's always mentioned? So, and these are all things that we certainly see pretty often. So, yeah, I think that is probably, I guess, what I would say to folks that feel that this could be a stick, so to speak, whereas, really this should be just another device that we're all using to make sure that we're just operationally excellent.
Yeah, really good point, Sam. And to your point, it's really important to really reward people when they do a good job, right? Not just look at it as like a gotcha where we're going to catch you if you're doing something wrong, but really if somebody does go above and beyond, you recognize them right away, or at least as soon as possible, even same shift ideally. So if somebody does a great job, a customer leaves a positive comment on them, at least give them a virtual shout out, but you can also incentivize them, give them, some kind of bonus, whatever it is, just to really make it a fun thing. And people feel good about that. And I think that's really what HappyOrNot is all about, is just making, positive experiences for everybody. So very important to do that.
Absolutely. And I hear a lot from customers from my onboarding and training sessions that I do. And I always tell them, you will win the hearts and minds of the frontline by providing incentives and rewards as opposed to penalties and critiques. So that's kind of like the motto that I go by and tell them for an outlook with this. And it just really comes down to the culture of the work environment. So the culture is going to be much better if you're focusing on the positive rather than negative. And I actually had one client tell me the story where every time the score dipped, the managers were asking the employees, like, what happened? So no one meant any harm by that, but the team started like feeling washed and kind of defensive because of, I guess, how that was approached. And then they said, the employees were even joking, like, well, I'll just go press the green button myself, So they started to change one thing. So they removed the blame from it. So instead of like reacting to those dips, they simply had the happy index goal for the month. So let's set a goal for all of us to reach. And that's where those rewards come in. So if they hit that goal, then okay, we get a coffee bar this month on a Friday. Or maybe there's a drawing for a gift card that all the employees get their names put into. So that's one way of doing that. But their biggest shift that they saw was when they started reading those positive comments in those team huddles. Before the shift, they have that team huddle. They start reading out those comments. Maria was so kind. The cashier made my whole day. So you could actually, they said you could actually feel the shift in the room. That means a lot, hearing that praise. So within weeks, they were saying the scores improved, and more importantly, the morale improved. Everyone's morale was way up. Everyone was working together to reach that goal. So once the team felt proud of that feedback, the gaming the system thing really didn't matter anymore. You can press a button, but you can't fake pride. So the culture that you build around that feedback, that's what's important, and that's what determines which one you're going to get.
Yeah, it's just so important how you frame it. That makes all the difference to the results you're going to get using the solution.
Absolutely. Yeah. At the end of the day, it isn't really about the score. It's about that culture you're creating around that score.
Yeah, that's a great story too, Jamie. I think I've seen maybe a surprising, cascading effect or whatever we want to refer to it as. But on LinkedIn, even I'll see some of our customers that will tag HappyOrNot, and you see it's a whole team they're there, they're smiling, they're standing next to the device. They, once things are implemented and off the ground, and they're starting to see that whole, wheel turn of okay, we see that this can now measure, we're going to take this change for this quarter or this year, or whatever. It doesn't have to be something that maybe you're a small organization and it's just you can only take a bite-sized piece out this year. Just making sure that you're actually measuring that. Is the thought leadership we're putting into this whole exercise, is it worth it? Are we seeing the returns? It's not the people usually. Yes, you might have a cashier that had a bad day, and that may or may not, or that maybe that should or shouldn't happen. But I think that's where, again, it goes back to leadership, making sure everybody understands why we're doing this, what's the purpose, getting everybody on the same page, and really just being transparent about the results. I think that's something maybe we haven't touched upon that as much yet. But I think sharing the results and that transparency is super important. I guess I'll save maybe some of that. I'm not sure if we're going to get into it later, but I'll be sure to mention more of it as we go.
Thank you both. And I think at the end of the day, it's not about the score. It's about the culture you're creating around that score, like we said. So I think we're ready to go ahead and move on to our next myth, which is that management ignores it. So where does the feedback usually get stuck? And how do strong teams avoid that?
So yeah, that's another good question. I find that it's not often that it's completely ignored. It's just really that there's nobody to take ownership over the data. So it's basically just orphaned. There's no person to act on it, or it's reviewed after the fact too late. So it's really important to build a consistent habit around reviewing the data. I always say try to check it at least once a day, maybe in the morning with your coffee. But definitely don't ignore it for a week or two and then look back and say, oh, we had issues this day. I mean, that kind of takes away from the whole thing that makes the solution work so well, is just getting that real-time pulse of what's going on every single day, so you can catch the issues before they snowball into bigger issues.
Exactly. It's very easy to check it daily too. I show in training how easy it is to we even have an app. You can log in on your phone very quickly and just check for the day, how it's looking. So it takes very little time.
Yeah, I think it goes back to maybe something I mentioned earlier on, where the store manager they're going to be able to oversee a certain set of tasks, and they'll just have certain knowledge that as you go up the chain, that might start to fall out. We've all played the game of telephone, and maybe a delivery just didn't happen one day for whatever reason. I know some folks have gotten snowstorms recently, which has delayed operations that are beyond their control, and maybe the director of X doesn't understand that, but the store manager does, and they're able to kind of make sure that their team is moving operationally as well as they can. And again, as we kind of go up that chain, there probably is some sort of cadence that happens with those directors or those senior managers or VPs, whoever it is. And I think just making sure that this becomes part of that program. I do think some folks maybe get a little too, like they aggregate the data maybe a little too much. So if we think maybe a traditional NPS, we're just targeting a benchmark usually. And it's helpful to see if you're, in the right lane, so to speak, with your program. But in terms of, when did things go wrong? How could we make it even better? How are we the best in class? That's really where we need some sort of formalized process. There needs to be, I think a daily cadence is perfect. I think that's where you're able to see, oh yeah, all of those daily huddles that you mentioned, Jamie, you can go through that. Again, maybe daily is too much for some companies. It doesn't have to, doesn't have to be as ongoing as that, but at least on a weekly basis, making sure that you're taking time to recognize your team. I'm sure most people are doing that on some basis already. So, making sure that you're actually showing them the same way we said that you said we did. It can be great to show, oh yeah, Jamie is doing all of these things perfectly. So I think that is super helpful. And then just from from some of those like promotional templates you had talked about, Jamie, the You Said We Did program, I think that is, again, just something to show transparency within the organization. Maybe you don't want to show I guess on the you said we did side, we would want to show our customers. But if I think on the sharing,
Results poster. We have a results poster. Yes.
Results poster. But if I think on the results poster front, that's where we may not want to show our customers what our score is on a given day, but at least putting that in the employee break room or something along those lines. So we see, oh yeah, it is an 82 today. I'm used to seeing an 85. Are we doing something? Is our manager having a bad day? Whatever the case may be, but you can determine the issue and actually act on it right then.
Absolutely. And it also helps with buy-in too. And I always say in my onboarding, being transparent and showing the customers and employees that you are looking at the data and this is what they're saying. It's not just some button presses that are going into the cloud and nobody's looking at them. Yes, we're very transparent. We're looking at this and we're making changes based on this. And this is what you're saying. So that's a really important part of that feedback loop.
Yeah. I mean, even if you never looked at the data at all, it still sends a good message to the customers. But yeah, obviously you really do want to have that cadence set up. And Sam, I'm sure you've seen different levels of like cadence levels depending on the seniority of the person. Maybe C levels aren't necessarily checking it daily, but at least staying in the loop. And it's important to also track the actions too, not just the scores, right? Because if you're only looking at the scores, then you can kind of miss what kind of the implications are and what actually is being done about the feedback there. So yeah, definitely good topic, good discussion.
I mentioned earlier that we have our app that we can use and we can, daily check the data very quickly that way. But with the app, you can also get alerts. And one thing that I talked about in a training, we were going through feedback from one of the clients and we were looking at the open comments, and this was a real comment. It literally said, the meat department is out of meat. So in order to avoid things like that happening or to fix those in real time, we can set alerts to where then the manager or someone can be notified and then they can make those changes in real time. They can go restock so that people aren't saying that the department is out of what they're supposed to be selling. So alerts are a great feature that we also have to help things like that. Our next myth is that it's too simplistic. So it doesn't tell you why. One-tap feedback is fast, but critics say it's too vague. So how do teams go from signal to action?
Yeah. I do think that we've talked a little bit about some of the different devices that we have in our portfolio. And I do think the type of device really depends on the environment that you're putting the device in. So there's some environments where if we think, it's a super fast paced environment where we don't want people to stop and, or there just isn't the time. If we think maybe a security lane at an airport, for example, that's generally pretty dynamic, pretty fast paced. They don't want people sticking around. So just having one of these 4-button terminals, sort of a simplistic, frictionless design, again, tap the button and move on. I think that is, sometimes that's just the best product for the situation. If you have some additional time, we do offer the Smiley sign and Smiley touch components, which would allow you to get more of the what is going on with the issue, I suppose, not just the sentiment of the person. But I do think it can be, on the face value, yes, it is a button press, but behind the scenes, that's where, if we're looking at probably every customer that I'm working with, we're at some point throughout the year looking at our heat maps. So we'll be able to see, oh yeah, this is when we have a clear service level issue going on. Again, maybe it's if we look at our heat map and we see the manager's schedule, maybe, and we can see, well, as soon as the manager clocks out, the happy index will drop. Again, it doesn't have to be something quite as black and white as that, but being able to see exactly when that feedback was left. So it's not just some, post-service text message that's generic that says, how did things go today or within the last week or last month, even in some cases. The person is actually indicating that feedback today, and we can see when that happened, what day it happened, and see it show up right away. It also will help us see, within, if we think maybe like an employee experience use case where maybe you have hourly employees, we can see, is the third shift compared to the first shift, and maybe it's not just because they're working overnight, maybe there's some other issues going on too, but we can start to compare, just from a numbers perspective, see what's going on with, the different work atmospheres. I think where it becomes simplistic is if we are, again, kind of going back to one of the last myths that we talked about, but if we just put one of our terminal devices in an area and collect feedback without ever looking at it or actioning it, it would be too simplistic and it wouldn't tell us the why. But we generally recommend that somebody would put, maybe in addition to that terminal device in the security lane checkout, maybe once you get further on within the airport, I guess, to continue the analogy, maybe we've got a richer collection fabric. So maybe we have some Smiley signs and maybe a touch device over here. And that way folks are able to leave their open comments. It's not necessary. We obviously can drive quite a few operational changes through just the terminal device. But if we can actually get the customers or the feedback giver, depending on the situation, but if we can actually get their wording as to what went wrong, when it went wrong, and how can we improve that moving forward, that is sort of the holy grail of that feedback loop, so to speak.
Yeah, this comes up a lot in my conversations with customers about, what can we really do with just a simple button press? And there was a customer that a couple of years ago that had a chain of grocery stores, and he noticed that one store in particular was always at the bottom of the list. And usually around noon every day, he was getting the worst feedback. So he thought, let me just go take a look. They had the terminal, just the buttons. And so he went and looked, and he saw that noontime, just like clockwork, all the employees were basically leaving for lunch at the same time and leaving all the customers, basically with nobody to help them. So with just the terminal, he was able to find that out. Now, if he had the touch, not like we have offer now, obviously it'd be kind of a shortcut. You could just see that there was a wait time issue or staff availability was the top pain point. But even just with the terminal, you're still able to get really good data and still be able to determine what the issues are. So there's a lot of value, and we have a comprehensive product portfolio. We call it the collection fabric. So part of what I do with customers on the call is basically just tell them, hey, walk me through your typical customer journey, what they typically do, where they dwell. That way we can develop a comprehensive plan as far as the best combination of different solutions to get you the best visibility possible.
And I think in either scenario, if you're using the touch, the terminal, or even any of the digitals or Smiley sign products that we offer, I think the other piece is connecting our data to some other data internally, whether that's some sort of sales data, and you're able to put that on a dashboard, or maybe you have some other, maybe it's an employee experience use case, and so you've got some other employee experience statistics that you've got in your data warehouse somewhere. Combining this data with that really can help give a better story, or at least start to paint a better story. It's not going to give you exactly what's going on, but if you start doing a little bit of analysis here and there, that really can go a long way. And that one button press that somebody had can all of a sudden turn into some, that was just kind of the smoke, or we use sometimes internally, it's the metal detector of what's going on. And we have to do some other, analysis of how to find exactly what the object is, I guess, I'll continue that analogy too.
Right. Not every device is right for every situation, right? A place like an airport where it gets millions and millions of people a year, you don't necessarily need to touch at specific locations like security checkpoints. There's people going through, every few seconds. There's tons of people walking through. So you don't necessarily need a touch. You would just have a terminal there so they could just hit the button, or in a restroom. Like a lot of people see us in airport bathrooms. A terminal is fine because there's only so many things that could go wrong in a bathroom. So again, it just depends on the situation, and we always try to find the best product and to fit the needs of each customer.
Absolutely. It's not a one size fits all. So there's a collection fabric for everyone. All right, let's land it there. The big takeaway, I think, is that the feedback tool isn't the magic, the loop is. And when real-time feedback is treated as a program and has an owner and has a daily rhythm and a simple playbook, it stops being lip service and it starts being something that's driving those operational improvements. So if you've heard any of these myths in your organization, please drop a comment in the thread and we'll be reviewing those after the broadcast. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. And as a reminder, this is being recorded, so feel free to rewatch it later or share it with your team. And thanks for joining, and thanks to Ethan and Sam.
Thanks, Jamie.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.